A stranger accidentally transferred $33 million to my account. I thought it was a mistake and immediately called the bank. But when I gave the manager my last name, he said, "Ma'am, this is not a mistake. The sender left you a message." Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Rachel Mercer, and I was 44 years old when my entire life changed because of a number on a screen. Before that Tuesday morning, I would not have called my life remarkable in any way. I rented a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Portland, Oregon, a place with slightly warped floorboards, a radiator that clicked all night in winter, and a window that looked directly into the brick wall of the building next door. I had lived there for 3 years, ever since my divorce from Tom was finalized, and I had walked out of our house in Beaverton with 2 suitcases and a dog named Biscuit, who died 6 months later of old age, as if he had been waiting to see me settled before letting go. I worked as a paralegal at a small family law firm called Hensley & Park. I had been there for 9 years. I knew every client story, every stack of documents, every procedural deadline. I was good at my job in the way that invisible people are often good at their jobs, quietly, thoroughly, without anyone stopping to notice. My boss, Gerald Hensley, once told me I was the engine of this office, which I understood to mean that I did the work and he signed the letters. I wasn't bitter about it. I had stopped being bitter about most things after the divorce. My mornings had a rhythm: alarm at 6:15, coffee from the machine on the counter, the same machine Tom had called a piece of junk, and I had kept out of stubbornness. A quick check of my phone before the shower, emails, weather, bank balance. The balance was always predictable, enough to feel safe, not enough to feel free. So when I picked up my phone that Tuesday, October the 14th, and opened my banking app out of habit, I assumed I would see the same number I always saw. A little over $4,000, maybe less because I had paid my car insurance that Friday. The number I saw instead stopped the breath in my throat: $33 million. I put the phone down on the kitchen counter. I picked it up again. The number was still there, $33 million, in my checking account, the same account where I deposited my bi-weekly paychecks and paid my electric bill. My first thought was completely rational. This is a mistake. Banks made errors. Decimal points moved. Somebody somewhere had typed the wrong account number. I had processed enough legal paperwork in my career to know that financial institutions were not infallible. The money was not mine. Of course it wasn't mine. I needed to call the bank immediately, report it, and let them sort it out before this became anyone's legal problem, including my own. I called the number on the back of my debit card. I was transferred twice. I ended up speaking with a branch manager named David Okafor, and his voice was calm and professional in a way that should have reassured me, but instead made me more anxious, the way a doctor's deliberate steadiness sometimes tells you more than their words. "I'm looking at a deposit in my account," I said, keeping my voice even. There must be an error. It's $33 million. I need to report it. I think someone made a mistake." There was a pause. Not long, maybe 3 seconds, but I noticed it. "Could I have your full name, ma'am?" he asked. "Rachel Ann Mercer." Another pause, longer this time. "Ms. Mercer," David Okafor said, and his voice had shifted almost imperceptibly, not alarmed, but careful, the way you speak when you are choosing your words with precision. "I'm going to need to verify a few things on your account, but I want to tell you right now, This is not a bank error." I sat down on one of my kitchen chairs. I didn't remember deciding to sit. "What do you mean it's not an error?" I said. "The transfer was made intentionally," he said. "It was processed through a private wealth management firm 3 days ago and cleared yesterday evening. And, Ms. Mercer—" He paused again, and this pause felt almost apologetic. "The sender left a message attached to the transfer, specifically addressed to you by name." I looked out my kitchen window at the brick wall. A pigeon was sitting on the ledge across the alley, perfectly still, watching nothing. "A message," I repeated. "Yes, ma'am." "From whom?" "From a Mr. Edward Calloway," he said. "Would you like me to read it to you, or would you prefer to come into the branch?" I had never heard the name Edward Calloway in my life, or so I believed, sitting in that kitchen, with the pigeon on the ledge and the coffee going cold and $33 million in my account. I was wrong about that. I had heard the name exactly once, 8 years ago, whispered by my mother on the last night of her life. I drove to the branch that same morning. I called Gerald at the office, told him I had a family emergency, which was not entirely a lie, though I didn't know yet how true it was. And I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 4 minutes before I could make myself go inside. The October sky over Portland was the color of old pewter. A woman walked past pushing a stroller with a baby inside it, wrapped in a yellow blanket. Everything looked unbearably ordinary. David Okafor was a tall man in his late 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and the professionally neutral expression of someone who had seen many unusual things and made it his personal policy not to appear surprised by any of them. He brought me into a private office. He closed the door. He offered me water, which I accepted and did not drink. Then he slid a single printed sheet across the desk toward me. It was a scan of a handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. The handwriting of someone who had made an effort, who had known this would be their last effort. "Dear Rachel, my name is Edward Calloway. I am 71 years old and I am dying of pancreatic cancer. I was diagnosed 8 months ago and I have perhaps 2 weeks left, possibly less. I am writing this in the study of my home in Scottsdale, Arizona on September the 28th. I don't expect you to know who I am. Your mother, Catherine Ann Mercer. She was Catherine Doyle before she married your father. And I were in love for 2 years when we were very young. She was 22. I was 24. We were in Boston together. She left in the summer of 1979, and I learned later that she was pregnant. She chose not to tell me. She chose the life she built with the man she married, and I respected that choice, even when it cost me something I cannot name. I only learned of your existence 4 years ago, when a private investigator I had hired confirmed that Catherine had given birth to a daughter in March of 1980, the same month the child would have been born if she were mine. I had a DNA test conducted on a strand of hair collected from a hairbrush you left behind at a hotel in San Francisco in 2019. I apologize for the intrusion. I was not certain how to approach you. The results confirmed what I had suspected for 20 years. You are my daughter. I have another family, a wife, Patricia, and a stepdaughter, Diane, from Patricia's first marriage. I have provided for them in my will, and I believe they will be comfortable. But I am a wealthy man, Rachel, and the wealth I built alone. I want you to have something. Not out of guilt, though there is some of that, but because you are my blood, and because I spent 30 years wondering about you, and because I am almost out of time. I have instructed my attorney and my bank to transfer $33 million to you upon my death. It is yours. I ask only that you know I thought of you. Your father, Edward Calloway. I read the letter twice. Then I folded my hands in my lap and looked at the water glass I had not touched. My mother had died 8 years ago. Ovarian cancer, fast and merciless, the way the worst things are. In the last 24 hours of her life, she had drifted in and out of consciousness in a hospital room in Eugene, and at some point, I had been holding her hand. She had said a name. I thought she was confused. I thought she was remembering something distant and unreachable. The name was Eddie. She had said it once, quietly, and then she had turned her face toward the window and never spoken again. Eddie. I sat across from David Okafor and I felt something tear loose inside my chest. Not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. My mother had carried this secret for more than 40 years. She had looked at me my entire life, knowing what she knew and had chosen, for reasons I would never be able to ask her about now, to say nothing. Did she think she was protecting me? Did she think I would be angry? Did she simply not want to disrupt the life she had built? I would never know. What I did know, what became terrifyingly clear to me in that small, quiet bank office, was that $33 million did not appear in a woman's checking account without consequences, legal consequences, practical consequences, human consequences. David Okafor explained carefully that the transfer had been made through Edward Calloway's private wealth management firm and was technically legal. The funds had cleared. They were, in every technical sense of the word, mine. But he also told me, gently, that estates of this size were frequently contested, that he had no knowledge of any legal proceedings, but that I should be prepared for the possibility. I drove home. I sat on my couch with Biscuit's old collar that I kept on the bookshelf, turning it in my hands, and I thought about the word contested. I thought about a wife named Patricia and a stepdaughter named Diane, who did not know me, and who, I strongly suspected, were not going to be pleased. I was right. That evening I opened my laptop and typed Edward Calloway's name into a search engine. Within 4 minutes I had found his obituary published in the Arizona Republic. Survived by his wife of 22 years, Patricia Calloway née Weston. Survived by his stepdaughter Diane Weston Calloway, age 38. And then I found something else. A legal filing dated 6 days ago, posted in the public records of Maricopa County, Arizona. Patricia Calloway, represented by the law firm Driscoll and Haig, had filed a petition contesting the estate of Edward Calloway on the grounds that a significant transfer of assets had been made in the final weeks of the decedent's life, under undue influence and possible mental incapacity. They were coming for the money. They were coming for me. I closed the laptop. I looked at my apartment. The warped floorboards, the clicking radiator, the brick wall outside the window, and I made a decision. I was not going to hand the money back. Not because I was greedy, not because I had suddenly become a different person, but because Edward Calloway had known my name. He had looked for me for 20 years. He had had my DNA tested. He had written that letter in his study in Scottsdale while he was dying, and he had made sure the money reached me, specifically me, out of the 8 billion people on this earth. That meant something, and I was not going to let 2 women who had never met me erase it. I needed a lawyer, a very good one. I picked up my phone. Margaret Torres went by Meg, and she came recommended by a colleague at my firm who described her as the woman you call when you're in the right and the other side has more money. That description, I would come to understand, was precise. Meg's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown, with a view of the Willamette River that she had clearly stopped noticing years ago. She was 52, compact and unhurried, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. She dressed like someone who had nothing to prove. She shook my hand, sat me down, and listened without interrupting for 31 minutes while I told her everything: my mother, the letter, the bank, the legal filing in Arizona. When I finished, she took off her reading glasses and looked at them for a moment. "Tell me something," she said. "Do you have the letter?" I had brought a copy. I slid it across her desk. She read it slowly. "He mentions a DNA test." "Yes." "That's your foundation," she said. "If we can get the results of that test, and we will, because Edward's attorney would have been instructed to retain everything, this becomes a very different case than the one Patricia Calloway is trying to build." She explained the legal landscape to me in the direct, unceremonious way of someone who understood that false comfort was a form of disrespect. Edward had made the transfer while alive to a named recipient through a legitimate wealth management firm. This was not a bequest from the will. It was a direct transfer. Patricia's undue influence argument would require her to prove that someone had pressured Edward into making the transfer. Since I had never met the man, that argument had a foundational problem. "But," Meg said, leaning back in her chair, "that didn't mean Patricia couldn't make my life very difficult in the meantime. She has resources," Meg said. "She has Driscoll and Haig, which is a serious firm. She's going to delay, complicate, and apply pressure. She may try to freeze the assets through an injunction while the estate dispute is pending. We need to move faster than she expects." We decided on 2 immediate actions. First, Meg would contact Edward's personal attorney, a man named Howard Steele, based in Scottsdale, Driggs, to request copies of the DNA test results, the transfer authorization, and any recorded statements Edward had made regarding his wishes. Second, we would begin the process of documenting my identity and my connection to Edward in preparation for a formal declaration of heirship. I left Meg's office feeling, for the first time since Tuesday morning, that I was standing on solid ground. That was October 15th. By October 21st, I could feel the ground beginning to shift. The first sign was small. I came home from work on a Thursday evening to find that someone had slid a blank envelope under my apartment door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words printed on it in plain black type. "You should walk away." No signature, no return address, no threat spelled out explicitly, just the implication hanging there in the air of my hallway like something left behind. I photographed it immediately and sent the photo to Meg. The second sign came 2 days later, on a Saturday. I was at the coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment, a place called Birch, where I went every weekend, where I knew the baristas by name and they knew my order. I was sitting by the window with my laptop, reviewing a case summary for Gerald, when I noticed a woman at the corner table looking at me. She was in her early 40s, expensively dressed in a way that seemed slightly out of place in a neighborhood coffee shop. A cashmere coat, leather gloves set on the table beside her cup. She had the look of someone who had been attractive in an aggressive, maintained way for a long time and was not intending to stop. When our eyes met, she did not look away. She held my gaze for 3 or 4 seconds, almost contemplatively, and then she picked up her phone and began typing. I didn't know who she was. I knew a week later when Meg's office received a copy of Diane Calloway's driver's license as part of the discovery process. I opened the file on my computer and felt something cold move through me. The woman in the photograph was the woman from the coffee shop, Diane Calloway, Edward's stepdaughter. She had come to Portland. She had found out where I lived, where I spent my Saturday mornings. She had sat across the room from me and said nothing, done nothing, just looked. It was the most effective threat she could have issued. But the same week, Howard Steele's office responded to Meg's inquiry. He had been expecting to hear from us, he said. Edward had been thorough. The package he sent contained 3 things: the DNA test results, confirming with 99.97% probability that Edward Calloway was my biological father, a notarized letter from Edward dictating his specific intent regarding the transfer, and a USB drive containing a video. Meg called me into her office to watch it. Edward Calloway looked like a man who had been strong and had spent the last months of his strength deliberately. He was thin, and the skin of his face was loose, and his eyes were the pale gray blue of a winter sea. He sat in a leather chair in what appeared to be a study lined with books, and he looked directly at the camera with a steadiness that I found almost unbearable. "My name is Edward Calloway," he said. "I am making this statement of my own free will, in full possession of my mental faculties, witnessed by my attorney Howard Steele, on the 14th of September of this year. I am transferring $33 million to my biological daughter, Rachel Ann Mercer, of Portland, Oregon. This transfer is not made under any external influence or duress. It is my deliberate wish. I would ask that whoever is watching this understand. This is not negotiable, and it is not reversible. It is the last choice I intend to make freely, and I have made it." He paused. He looked at the camera for a moment longer than necessary, as if he knew that somewhere, sometime, I would be watching. "Take care of yourself, Rachel," he said quietly. And then the video ended. I sat in Meg's office with my hands folded, and I did not cry, though I wanted to. I thought about the man in that chair. I thought about my mother saying the name Eddie in a hospital room 8 years ago, her face turned toward a window. Meg was watching me carefully. "This is our foundation," she said. "This is everything we need." She was right, but she also knew, and she said this plainly, the way she said everything, that having the right evidence and winning were 2 different things, and that the road between them was going to be difficult. She had no idea yet exactly how difficult Patricia and Diane Calloway intended to make it. On the 1st of November, Meg filed a formal declaratory judgment action in Multnomah County, a legal instrument establishing my right to the transferred funds and preemptively countering any injunction Patricia might attempt to obtain. It was a clean, aggressive move, and it was designed to send a message. We were not waiting to be attacked. We were establishing position. By November 3rd, Driscoll and Haig had received notice of our filing. By November 5th, I had received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was a woman's, measured, pleasantly modulated in the way of someone who had learned to speak pleasantly as a professional skill. She introduced herself as Patricia Calloway. "I think we should talk," she said. "Just the 2 of us, without attorneys." I said nothing, which she took as permission to continue. "I don't blame you for any of this, Rachel," she said, and my name in her mouth sounded careful and deliberate, like she had practiced it. "Whatever Edward told you, however this happened, you need to understand that he was not well, not at the end. He was confused, and he was susceptible to certain ideas. Our attorneys can prove that. We will prove that." "That would be difficult," I said, "given the video recording he made in the presence of his attorney in September." A brief silence. "I'm asking you," she said, and the pleasantness in her voice had contracted slightly, like a pupil in bright light. as one woman to another, please consider what you're doing. I have considered it very carefully, I said. You should speak to my attorney. I ended the call. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I called Meg immediately and told her. She said Patricia had likely been advised not to make that call and had done it anyway, which told us something useful about her temperament. 4 days later, on the evening of November 9th, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole. 2 women. One of them I recognized as Diane Calloway, the woman from the coffee shop, the woman from the driver's license photograph. Beside her was an older woman, taller, in a dark wool coat, Patricia. My first instinct was not to open the door. My second instinct overruled it because I understood, in the clear-eyed way that Meg's pragmatism had begun to sharpen in me, that their coming to my door was itself information. I took my phone out, opened the voice memo app, pressed record, and slid it into my cardigan pocket with the microphone facing outward. Then I opened the door. Patricia Calloway was, in person, an impressive woman in the way that certain structures are impressive, large, deliberate, and built to last. She was in her mid-60s, beautiful in a way that had been expensive and sustained, with the particular brand of composure that comes from decades of being the most important person in a room. She looked at me with something that was almost curiosity, as if she were assessing a piece of property whose value was unclear. "May we come in?" she asked. "No," I said. Something flickered across her face. She had not expected that. "Rachel," Diane said, stepping slightly forward. She was less composed than her mother. Her jaw was tight, her eyes bright with something I recognized after a moment as genuine fury, which she was working hard to contain. "We're not here to threaten you. We're here because the situation has gotten completely out of hand and we would like to resolve it reasonably. Your attorneys have sent us correspondence suggesting they intend to argue mental incapacity," I said. "How does that constitute a reasonable resolution?" "Edward was dying," Diane said. "He was on significant pain medication. He was not in a position to make a decision of this magnitude, and our attorneys are prepared to demonstrate—" "Your attorneys are welcome to present that argument in court," I said. "I look forward to it." Patricia had not spoken again. She was watching me with that appraising expression, and I watched her back. And for a moment, we were simply 2 women standing in a hallway, looking at each other across $33 million, and the ghost of a man neither of us had known fully. "You seem like an intelligent woman," Patricia said finally, and her voice had changed. The pleasantness was entirely gone now, replaced with something flatter and more direct. "So I'll be direct with you. We have resources you do not have. We have legal teams you cannot match. And we have the patience to make this process take years. Years, Rachel. Is that what you want? Is that what you're prepared for?" "Yes," I said simply. Another flicker. This one lasted longer. "This is a mistake," she said. "Perhaps," I said, "but it's mine to make." I closed the door. I stood in my hallway and I breathed. My phone was still recording in my pocket. I waited 2 full minutes, then took it out and stopped the recording. 38 minutes of audio. Patricia Calloway's voice, clear and distinct. "We have resources you do not have. We have legal teams you cannot match, and we have the patience to make this process take years." I sent the file to Meg that night. She called me back within the hour, and for the first time since I had hired her, I heard something in her voice that might have been satisfaction. "They came to your home," she said. "Yes." "Without their attorneys?" "Yes." And Patricia made an explicit statement that could reasonably be construed as a threat of prolonged litigation intended to coerce a settlement. She did. A pause. "Rachel," Meg said, "I want you to take a few days. Don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. Don't check the Arizona court records. I'll monitor those. I want you to rest because what comes next is going to require you to be sharp." I took her advice. I spent 4 days largely alone. I walked along the river in the early mornings when the fog was still low on the water. I cooked meals I actually ate. I slept 8 hours a night for the first time in weeks. I did not call anyone. I sat with the silence of my apartment and I found, to my own surprise, that I was not afraid. I was ready. The offer arrived on a Monday, 2 weeks after the confrontation at my door. It came not by phone this time, but through formal legal correspondence, which told me that Driscoll and Haig had gotten hold of Patricia after her unsupervised visit and made clear that improvised doorstep conversations were not a winning strategy. The letter was 2 pages of immaculate legal language, but its substance was simple. Patricia Calloway, in the interest of an equitable and amicable resolution, was offering Rachel Ann Mercer a one-time settlement of $750,000, contingent on Rachel signing a comprehensive release of all claims to the transferred funds and agreeing to a non-disclosure agreement regarding the circumstances of Edward Calloway's estate. $750,000. From $33 million. I read the letter sitting at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, and I noticed that my first emotion was not temptation. It was something more like clarity, the kind that comes when someone reveals, by the nature of their offer, exactly how frightened they are. If Patricia genuinely believed her legal position was strong, she would not be offering me $750,000 to go away quietly. The offer was an admission dressed up as generosity. I sent Meg a one-word text, "No." She called me 20 minutes later. "You're sure?" she asked, not because she doubted me, but because it was her professional obligation to confirm. "Completely," I said. "All right," she said. "I'll send them our response." I spent the rest of that day at work, which was an interesting experience, sitting at my desk at Hensley and Park, reviewing custody agreements and property division schedules, knowing that in another layer of my life there was a case with my own name on it that was larger than anything on Gerald's docket. I had told no one at work what was happening. I didn't know how to begin. But that evening, I called Joanna. Joanna Bird had been my closest friend for 16 years. We had met in a continuing education class at Portland Community College, both of us studying something we no longer remembered, and had become the kind of friends who could call each other at 10:30 on a weeknight without preamble. She was a middle school art teacher with 2 sons, a husband named Carl who brewed his own beer and genuinely believed it was good, and a quality of attention that made you feel, when she was listening to you, like the most important person in the world. I went to her house. I sat at her kitchen table, a table covered in Carl's beer brewing equipment and her son's school projects, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, the way she always did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How are you?" she asked. Not "what are you going to do" or "are you sure about this?" Just "how are you?" "I don't entirely know," I said honestly. "That seems right," she said. She poured me more wine. "What do you need?" I told her I needed to not be alone with it for one evening, and she said that was completely reasonable, and we talked about it for 2 hours. Not strategically, but humanly, the way you talk about things that have knocked the coordinates out of your life. She asked about my mother. She asked what I knew about Edward. She asked if I was sleeping. At the end of the evening, she walked me to the door, and she held my hand for a moment in the way she had held it at Tom's, and my divorce proceedings, and at my mother's funeral, and she said, "You are doing the right thing. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." There was also Ben. Ben Okafor, no relation to the banker, which I found slightly ironic, was a co-worker at Hensley & Park, a junior paralegal who had been there for 2 years and who I had never been particularly close to until one afternoon in mid-November when he knocked on the frame of my office door and asked, with an expression of careful casualness, if I was all right. I looked at him. "You've seemed different for the past few weeks," he said. "Not bad different. Just like you're carrying something." I shouldn't have told him. I nearly didn't. But there was something in his directness, the lack of performance in it, the genuine, uncomplicated concern that undid me slightly. I told him a shortened version, the transfer, the letter, the legal situation. He was quiet for a moment. "My father is a bank manager," he said, which is how I learned of the coincidence of his surname. And then, "Do you need help with anything? Research, document review, anything I can do off the clock?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," I said. "Actually, I think I do." Ben became, in the weeks that followed, an unofficial second set of eyes. Someone who helped me organize the documentary record, cross-reference dates in the estate timeline, spot inconsistencies in Driscoll and Haig's filings that I might have missed on my own. He was meticulous and unobtrusive about it, and he never asked for anything in return, which is rarer than people tend to acknowledge. I had come into this alone. I was no longer alone. And Patricia Calloway, I knew, would not be pleased about that. They came on a Saturday in late November, 2 days before Thanksgiving, which I suspected was not a coincidence. Holidays have a softening effect. People want peace before they sit down to eat with their families. It was a calculated choice of timing. Patricia called first in the morning. She was using her pleasant voice again, the practiced warmth that I had now learned to read like a weather forecast. The more agreeable it sounded, the worse the storm behind it. "I'd like to talk," she said. "Just a conversation. No lawyers. I know we got off on the wrong foot, Rachel. I'd like to change that." I told Meg immediately. Meg said it was my decision whether to meet them, but if I did, I should keep my phone recording and agree to nothing in writing or verbally. I said I would meet them. Not because I trusted Patricia. I had stopped trusting her approximately 30 seconds after she'd opened her mouth at my apartment door, but because I understood that information was always more useful than silence, and whatever they were planning to say would tell me something. We met at a restaurant in the Pearl District that Patricia had chosen, which told me something in itself. It was the kind of place where the lighting was designed for comfort, and the booth seats were deep, and the ambient noise was low enough that conversations felt private. The kind of place where difficult things were said gently. Patricia and Diane were already seated when I arrived. Patricia had dressed for the occasion, a cashmere sweater in deep burgundy, pearls, the kind of presentation that communicated warmth and authority simultaneously. Diane was in a gray blazer, her expression arranged into something approximating openness. They both stood slightly as I approached, which I thought was a nice touch. We ordered drinks. We exchanged several minutes of surface pleasantries that none of us meant. And then Patricia set down her glass and looked at me with an expression that was almost maternal, concerned, gentle, full of a sorrow she wanted me to believe was genuine. "Rachel," she said, "I want you to know that I understand this situation has been disorienting for you, learning about Edward this way. It must have been an enormous shock, and I want you to know that I don't blame you for any of your choices so far. How could I? You didn't know. You didn't know. I recognized the structure of what she was building. It was a sentence designed to make me feel naive, to position me as someone who had been acted upon rather than someone who was acting. I know quite a lot now, I said pleasantly, a small adjustment in her expression. Of course. What I mean is, you didn't know Edward, not the real man. You've only seen what he chose to present in that letter. And in his final months, Edward was... She paused, and the pause was theatrical, the grief in it rehearsed. He was not himself. The man I married was a deliberate, careful person. He was not someone who would make a decision of this magnitude impulsively. He didn't make it impulsively, I said. He made it over the course of 4 years. Diane leaned forward slightly. You don't have any idea what the last 2 years were like, she said, and there was a crack in her composure. Something genuine under the performance, though I wasn't certain it was grief. The medication, the paranoia. He convinced himself that we had... She stopped. She looked down at the table. He changed. The cancer changed him. The DNA test wasn't paranoia, I said. Rachel. Patricia's voice was softer now, and she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. The physical contact was deliberate, intimate, and slightly overwhelming. I want to propose something to you, something that I think is genuinely fair. She named a new number, $1.5 million, double the previous offer. A private arrangement documented through their firm, finalized within 30 days. Think of what that means for your life, Diane said. You could buy a house. You could pay off any debt. You could... Stop, I said. They both stopped. I looked at Patricia's hand on mine for a moment. Then I turned my hand over and removed it from beneath hers, with a motion that was deliberate but unhurried. The way you set something down carefully so it doesn't break. I want to make sure I understand what you're offering, I said. You want me to take $1.5 million out of 33, sign a document saying I have no further claims, agree to never speak about this publicly, and walk away from the legal record that establishes I am Edward Calloway's biological daughter. It's a generous... You want me, I said, to accept 4.5 cents on the dollar, relinquish my legal identity as his daughter, and disappear quietly so that the two of you can retain everything that a dying man specifically chose not to leave you. The table was very quiet. You're making a mistake, Diane said, and the composure had entirely collapsed now, her voice low and tight with real anger. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with, I said. I folded my napkin. I gathered my coat. Enjoy your dinner. I walked out of the restaurant into the cold November evening, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing the air. The city moved around me. Cars, people, the smell of rain coming. My legs were slightly unsteady. Was I frightened? Yes. Standing there on the Pearl District sidewalk, I was frightened in the way you are frightened when you have done something irrevocable and the enormity of it hasn't quite finished arriving. Patricia Calloway was a woman with resources and patience and a legal team that had managed rich people's disputes for decades. She had looked at me across that table with an expression I hadn't fully been able to read, and that was the part that frightened me most. The part I couldn't read. But fear, I had found, was useful. Fear sharpened things. Fear reminded you what was at stake, which was the surest way to remember why you were fighting. I got in my car. I drove home. I called Meg and told her about the meeting and the new offer. Good, she said. The fact that they're escalating the amount tells us they're worried. We go forward." I said yes. We went forward. The hearing was set for the second week of December in a courtroom in Multnomah County that smelled of old wood and heating vents and the particular institutional neutrality of rooms where people come to settle what cannot be settled any other way. I had worn a gray suit, deliberate in its restraint. I sat beside Meg at the plaintiff's table, hands still, face quiet. And I looked at Patricia and Diane across the courtroom the way you look at something you have studied long enough that it no longer surprises you. Patricia had assembled a formidable team. Lead counsel was a man named Gareth Driscoll, tall, silver-haired, the kind of lawyer who seemed to have been born wearing a suit. Patricia sat directly behind the defense table in a charcoal suit, her expression composed. Diane was beside her, slightly rigid, hands folded in her lap. Driscoll and Haig intended to present 3 claims: that Edward had suffered cognitive decline prior to the transfer, that Rachel Mercer had made contact with Edward and somehow influenced him, and the most audacious claim that the letter I had received was a fabrication, supported by a hired document analysis expert. Driscoll presented methodically and with skill. He spoke about Edward's pain medication, his fragile psychological state, the suspicious proximity of the transfer to his death. Judge Weitzel, the Honorable Sandra Weitzel, late 50s, an expression of someone reserving judgment on everything, made occasional notes. Her face revealed nothing. Then Meg stood up. She began with the DNA evidence, clean, clinical, factual. She presented Howard Steele's sworn affidavit confirming that Edward had initiated the search for his biological daughter 4 years before his death, and that the transfer had been planned and documented for over a year. She addressed the cognitive decline argument with the written declaration of Edward's oncologist, Dr. Rafael Herrera, who confirmed there was no clinical indication of cognitive impairment prior to the final 72 hours of Edward's life. The transfer had been authorized 6 weeks before his death. Then Meg requested to play the video. Judge Weitzel granted it. The courtroom went quiet as Edward Calloway's face appeared on screen, pale, thin, steady, looking directly into the camera. "I am making this statement of my own free will, in full possession of my mental faculties, witnessed by my attorney Howard Steele, on the 14th of September of this year." From across the courtroom, I heard a sharp intake of breath. I didn't look to see who had made it. Edward spoke for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He was clear, specific, and calm. He named me. He explained the DNA test. He stated the amount of the transfer and his reasons for it with the directness of a man creating a legal record. And at the end, quietly, "Take care of yourself, Rachel." When the video ended, the silence lasted a moment longer than it needed to. Meg then presented the document analysis rebuttal, a competing report from a nationally recognized forensic expert who had confirmed the letter matched Edward's handwriting and identified 3 technical errors in Driscoll and Haig's expert methodology. Driscoll objected twice. Judge Weitzel sustained neither. Then Meg introduced the audio recording. She explained its provenance, made on my own phone during the unsolicited visit to my apartment on November 9th. She played the relevant portion. Patricia's voice came through the courtroom speaker with perfect clarity. "We have resources you do not have. We have legal teams you cannot match. And we have the patience to make this process take years." Patricia moved in her seat. Diane's folded hands went rigid, not composed, but shocked. Driscoll objected on the grounds of improper recording. Meg was prepared. Under Oregon law, only one party to a conversation is required to consent, and that party had been present throughout. Judge Weitzel overruled. Then came 2 segments from Diane's deposition, played back to back. In the first, Diane had stated under oath that she and Patricia had never visited Rachel Mercer's home. In the second, that Patricia had never communicated with Rachel outside formal legal channels. The audio recording contradicted both statements directly. I watched Diane across the courtroom. The rigidity had spread from her hands to her entire posture. She was looking at a point somewhere above the floor, somewhere private and unreachable. Patricia was very still. The composure was technically present, but something had drained out of it, the way color drains from a face when the blood has gone elsewhere. Driscoll's closing argument was noticeably less forceful than his opening. Judge Weitzel made a brief note when he finished. "I'll have my ruling within 5 business days," she said. I walked out of that courtroom into the December cold with Meg beside me. She said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The ruling came on a Friday. Meg called at 8:17 in the morning, early for her, which meant she had been reading it since it arrived. "Judge Weitzel ruled in your favor," she said, "across the board." I was standing in my kitchen, still in my robe, holding my coffee mug with both hands. I looked out the window at the gray December sky above the brick wall. "Completely?" I said. "Completely." She read me the relevant language. The court found that Rachel Ann Mercer was the biological daughter of Edward Calloway, as established by DNA evidence. The transfer had been made with full legal authority and in sound mind, as established by testimony, medical records, and the video declaration. The court rejected the claims of cognitive incapacity, undue influence, and letter fabrication, all of them, entirely. And then the part Meg read with particular care. The court found that Diane Calloway had made demonstrably false statements under oath. Judge Weitzel was referring the matter to the Oregon State Bar for disciplinary review of Driscoll and Haig's conduct, and separately referring Diane's false statements to the Multnomah County District Attorney for consideration of perjury charges. Additionally, Patricia's statement at my apartment, entered permanently into the legal record, had been cited as evidence of bad faith conduct throughout the proceedings. As a result, Patricia Calloway was ordered to pay my legal fees in full, just under $340,000. The $33 million remained mine, all of it. I sat down on the kitchen floor. I had never done that before in my adult life. The coffee had gone cold in my hands. Things moved quickly after that. Patricia's legal team had 48 hours to file an appeal and chose not to, a decision that reflected their own assessment that an appeal would only deepen the damage. Driscoll and Haig quietly withdrew from Patricia's representation shortly thereafter. By December 22nd, the money was fully and legally secured. The perjury referral against Diane was serious. The DA's office opened a preliminary investigation in January. Whether charges would ultimately be filed remained uncertain, but the investigation's consequences, professional, financial, reputational, began immediately. The bar complaint against Driscoll and Haig was also ongoing, with subpoenaed associates providing information that suggested their document analysis strategy had been more aggressively constructed than professional standards permitted. Patricia returned to Scottsdale. I sent no message and made no statement. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in that courtroom. What I did do, on the evening the ruling was finalized, was go to Joanna's house. Carl opened the door, took one look at my face, and produced a bottle of his genuinely terrible homemade beer, which I drank without complaint because it was offered with a whole heart. Joanna held me in her kitchen for a long time. Her sons drifted through in the mystified way of children who sense something important without having a frame for it. "Is it over?" Joanna asked. "It's over," I said. Ben, when I told him Monday morning, said nothing, only nodded once, slowly, with the expression of someone whose confidence in an outcome has been confirmed rather than surprised. Gerald Hensley sat behind his desk and looked at me like a man rearranging his understanding of someone he had known for 9 years. "$33 million, he said. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "The engine of this office," he said, almost to himself. I gave 4 weeks' notice the following day. The first thing I did with the money was nothing for 30 days. Meg had advised it. Let the dust settle. You've been moving at crisis speed for 3 months. It was good advice. I walked along the river, cooked, read, called Joanna. I let myself be ordinary, which is a thing I had almost forgotten how to do. In January, I bought a house, a craftsman bungalow in northeast Portland, built in 1924 with original hardwood floors and a back garden full of potential. It had a kitchen with a window that looked out over the garden instead of a brick wall. I stood there on the first morning I owned it, coffee in hand, and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost stopped expecting it. I established a donor-advised fund through a Portland Community Foundation, legal aid, a community college scholarship, and the animal rescue where Joanna volunteered. She cried when I told her about that last one. I started consulting part-time for Meg's firm, on my own hours. In March, I joined a ceramics class 3 blocks from my house. I was terrible at it. It was the most peaceful hour of my week. As for Patricia and Diane, I didn't go looking for information. It found me anyway. Patricia's legal fees had been substantial, and Edward's estate, it turned out, had been largely redirected to charitable organizations he designated years earlier. The picture that emerged was of a man who had spent his final years quietly rerouting his wealth away from a household that had expected to inherit everything. Patricia lost the Scottsdale house the following autumn, not in a single crisis, but through the accumulated weight of legal fees and reduced income. She moved to a smaller place in Phoenix. Diane faced the perjury investigation for nearly a year. The DA ultimately declined to file charges, but the process had cost her professionally and personally. She relocated and started over, which is a polite way to describe a situation that was essentially a restart under difficult conditions. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was simpler than that. The recognition that consequences are not punishment. They are the shape of what we have chosen catching up with us. In June, I planted the back garden, roses along the east fence, lavender along the west, herbs near the back door. I worked in it